freestyle rap at all?
Not yet.
Doesn't it appear to be extremely coincidental that you guys arrest people right outside of Governor Newsom's press conference? Is this really just a show of power?
Patriots, this is Secret Service Sam. Welcome to Samson's World. Oh my MGs. As our nation comes to grips with these Epstein files being released, all they want to do, can we just talk about something else? Hey, Stan Durka, how you doing? Can we just talk about something else, like how good the nation is doing now? When you're talking about harming the youth, there's nothing more important. Money doesn't matter. The economy doesn't matter. The stock market doesn't matter. What matters is protecting our most vulnerable, and that is young children. Hello, Silky Sweet. How are you? It's almost hard to fathom how we got here. Right? Because it was that we all agreed that, you know, and prisoners, like I say, the worst of us agree, prisoners who are rapists, murderers, everything in jail. If you're if you hurt children, you die. You go to jail, you go to prison, and they handle you prison style. Silky Sweet, I'm glad to hear you're doing good today. I don't know if you guys saw my show yesterday. I had a guy on, hardcore MAGA in the middle of Texas. Just brutal listening, honestly, to the guy. Some people are like, Sam, why do you have these people on? Why do you invite people on? I invite anybody onto my show who has a disagreement with my views, because I believe it's important to know the psyche of some of these crazy people that are out there. And if you go watch the episode from yesterday, this guy, he was hardcore MAGA in the middle of Texas, called himself a Christian, went to church every weekend, and couldn't understand how the things he was saying. I mean, he dropped the N-word. And then I said, you know, that's pretty racist, right? I was like, I ain't racist. And I'm like, wow. Yes, I'm seeing that a lot of MAGA, there's a difference between, I'm not really subscribing to left or right, any of these gangs anymore, red and blue. Now it just seems like, are you a pedophile protector, or are you on the right side of history and you want to eradicate all pedophiles from the earth? Now, I'm going to show you this CFH Unfiltered. He is a former sniper who served our country. He's a great content creator. He went through some of the Epstein files and was showing, they're redacted, of course, but just a few of the pictures that are in this thing, so you understand how deep this goes, how disgusting it is. Howard Buttlick, I call him, lied, said, oh no, I was neighbors with Epstein, and it's just coincidental. Then we come to find out he lied under oath, and he actually visited Epstein Island on a boat with his children. He brought his wife and 4 kids to Epstein Island. Now, I've heard of taking your kid to Disneyland, but Epstein Land? No. I don't think that's ever. I mean, what excuse could he possibly have? And guys, the bricks are falling apart. MAGA, I am predicting, is going to have to finally admit, and look, the Democrats, everybody, this pedophile ring sees no party lines. There's Hollywood people, everybody, from what we're hearing, from what some of these congressmen are saying, it's sick. And that this will destroy our entire system. And I think most Americans are like, great, let's clear house on these fucking pedophiles. Let's start over. because we let these rich, white, elite billionaires control everything. And it's time to take it back. And people are saying, you know, in the UK, people are falling left and right. The prime minister, they're getting rid of people left and right over this. And everybody is saying, so how in America how is Donald Trump still hanging on? And I think we're closing in. They say Donald Trump is in the Epstein files allegedly 1 million times. Okay. It went from like, you know, I remember seeing Eric Stalwell, I think that Stalwell, asking Kash Patel, so how many times, Kash, do you think Trump's in the files? I don't know. You know, Kash Patel, he says, do you think it's 1,000 times? No. Think it's 500 times? No. Think it's 100 times? No. And then Eric Swalwell, what he was saying is like, oh, my number wasn't high enough. We originally thought it was around 5,000. Now it is 1 million times that Donald Trump is mentioned in there. Funny enough, Obama is mentioned quite a few times, but it's them going off on Obama. And this is the one time I will say, thank God for the racists, because Jeffrey Epstein said it himself. I don't want any N-words on the island. So thank you to racism. This one time we can give it up to racism that these young black women, and really can't call them women, these young black children were saved. It's just a whole disgusting, I think America and the world, there is just an entire reckoning that we're all going to have to see unfold. So grab your popcorn. This shit is about to be lit in America. It is going to get crazier and deeper than you would imagine. People you couldn't imagine. I mean, they're saying Jay-Z, they're saying Pusha T. You know, I mean, Alan Dershowitz, meanwhile, is figuring out a way for Trump to run a third term. Why? Allegedly, they are all part of this Epstein cover-up. All of them. Kash Patel, before he got in office, he said, there's a little black book, you know, who controls that? The FBI director. Dan Bongino got in there. Fucking right-wing podcast. Dan Bongino. All he said, yeah, day one, we're going to release it. And then he goes, look, if there was anything in those files that was incriminating, we would have released them. Right. Bullshit. Look at what CFH filter. This is sad. So viewer discretion is it is extremely advised.
You two very, very disturbing photos in the Epstein files. And I debated on whether I should even show these photos. But we're being gaslit that a lot of these victims were like 16 or 17. Megyn Kelly even said, it's not like they were 8. Okay, here's the first photo. This girl's like 10. She's just a kid. My daughter has shoes that are very similar to those shoes.
Look at this picture.
And here's the other photo. And this girl's like 8 years old. And her shirt is pulled down. And I want to make it very clear that the first thing this administration did when they went into office is they redacted all of the co-conspirators' names. Why? Before the Epstein Transparency Act even passed. The FBI knows who took this photo. They know who this photo was sent to. They know who sent the photo. And they are trying to protect those people. Why is this administration protecting these people? Because why is Trump's name in these files 1 million times?
Yeah, damn.
Why are over 36 people in Trump's cabinet in the Epstein files? We cannot let this shit slide.
I think the reason, and it's becoming obviously more and more clear, why Trump had to make sure he had loyalists, butt lickers, all around him, like Pam Bondi, like Kash Patel, Howard Lutnick, Stephen Miller. Stephen Miller, I cannot wait to see that male micro penis. He looks like a talking dick. I cannot wait to see them see justice. And this is usual from the butt licking MAGA. They always say the same thing. What about Biden's administration had all this information for a whole 4 years? He was in office, but now it's Trump's fault. F off. Bill Smith, you clearly are a pedophile protector. And what's funny is people are so dumb they don't realize, because Democrats are also, they are also part of this cover up. That is what's going on. You know, God, you know, the wonderful beauty about God, whether what you believe, or just, let's say, the truth will always come to light. You can keep it down for a while, but it will always come to light. And here's some of the pedophile protectors. Here come the MAGAs in the comments. This is just part of the show, guys. And here's something I always do. I had a MAGA guy on here yesterday, you know, because I believe, you know, obviously everybody likes to throw names. They like to hurl insults at everybody. But that's not going to make things better. We need to educate each other. We need to talk. And here is the link to my show. If anybody wants to come say this shit to my face, the funny thing that I've heard, especially since Ashley Biden said what are you saying? Her dad used force. And yeah, I know. Everybody they always, God, you guys just cannot stop talking about Biden. Okay. Maybe Biden's on this. If he's on the list, I haven't heard anything about Biden's name mentioned on the list. But I think a lot of you MAGA, I hope you're not talking about me. I voted for Kamala. I voted. Okay. I spell this. Ron is back in the chat. Come on in, Ron. What are you thinking?
You know, I didn't see the episode that you had done yesterday. You mentioned that said to go watch it. I might take a look at it, and maybe next time I call in, we have a conversation about it.
It was interesting. Just real quick, this guy, and you know, his name was Texas Air Gunner, and I appreciate him coming on to share his opinion. But the hilarious part is he was calling black people the N-word. And then I said, do you think you're racist? He's like, no, I'm not racist, which is pretty hilarious. I mean, I would say he was pretty, we have radical left, we have radical right. And I would say he was maybe about an 8 out of 10. But yeah, what would you like to say? I spell this wrong.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm interested in what you're talking about. I would like to maybe discuss some of that racism that is taking place, because, people can project that onto the other side as well, saying, oh, the left are racist against white people, blaming white people for all these sorts of things. And that is kind of what I wanted to talk about. The other day when I called in, I think it was about 4 days ago, there were two other individuals on, and you had to end your show. So I wanted to kind of address some of the things that were being said about legal immigration.
Right. That was the big thing. That's honestly a big sticking point. Is people, the Fourth Amendment, I was talking with this guy yesterday that, we were saying that anybody who comes into the country, even if you're here, you come in illegally, you get due process under our constitutions, from the way I've understood it. But what do you have some further information on that?
So, the point that I always try to make to these people is that I go, Christopher Columbus didn't have a green card. The founding fathers, Abraham Lincoln, Thomas Jefferson, these individuals didn't come here legally. And this was one of the points being made on the call, where they said, there was no rule of law. There was no sort of organization or government or anything like that in America prior to the founding fathers showing up. And that's simply not true. That is not true at all. The Iroquois nations, there were several nations, large communities that then had further tribaling communities underneath them, right? So, you have the Kiowa, Apache, Comanche, the Sioux, the Cree, all of these nations, right, that then had furthering tiny communities of tribal communities underneath them. They had a rule of law within their tribal community, and then those also nations as well had a rule of law. And then as well, the nations together with each other, Apache and Comanche, had a rule of law for engagement of how they engaged with each other. And it was called the Great Law of Peace. You could go read, everybody could go read the Great Law of Peace. It was inspiration to some of the parts of the United States Constitution. And so so there was a rule of law that existed in the United States prior. It was called Turtle Island at the time, prior to Columbus coming here. And so when we discuss these sorts of racism and xenophobia, it gets a little difficult for, this is where I would argue some of the, leftists that are getting called extreme are getting so upset, because they're looking at things like that saying, well, there was a rule of law. You are kind of being xenophobic because the Native Americans welcomed people here and said, let's try to work together and do things together. And the American system has done nothing but oppress them. If you speak with Native Americans today, it is an ongoing genocide that has been happening for the last 500 years, essentially. Not even the past 200 from America's founding, but from the start of Columbus landing in the New World. And so I see these sorts of things of the extremism on the left, where we're calling out racism, we're calling about xenophobia, and then individuals are going, oh, is that all you could say? You just insult us, you just call us racist and xenophobic all the time. And it
just to let you know, I want to say there's plenty of racist Democrats. And, I always say every Karen who's caught on tape, if you ask him, like, I'm not racist. So there is racist on both sides of the aisle, of course, and I totally agree with you on that.
And yeah, so I think that learning American history, even pre-colonial and things that took place before the Constitution, is really a beneficial thing for, I would say, both left and right to understand these sorts of things, to try to bridge this gap here, because I feel like that's where it starts to get extreme. Then, if a right-winger comes and talks to me and I say all these things about history, then they feel kind of demoralized or insulted, where they're like, I do know American history, I do know what I'm talking about. And I'm like, look, I'm not saying that you don't. I'm not trying to say that you don't. What I'm saying is you seem to not know about the great law of peace, the rule of law that existed and inspired parts of the Constitution. And so we need to implement ideologies of Native American practices into our rule of law today, not to subject other American citizens, like some of these Republicans are trying to suggest, but in allowance for Native cultures that live here to exist in a better rule of law, under rules of law and systems that work for them. We're not saying that this is implemented into, the left isn't saying, oh, we have to get rid of everything of all of the rules of law in America and now live like Native Americans did. That doesn't make any sense. That wouldn't work. We need to have both systems functioning together and have these right-wingers come and say, okay, you know what? History has been xenophobic. History has been racist. Some of these laws written into the book by America are racist. And what we need to do is come together left and right and say, how do we change these? What words do we want to say and put into this rule of law?
I totally agree. And I think you bring up an excellent point. And I look, in high school, middle school, I'll be honest, college, I cared less about history. And I find now, especially now, like, I've learned so much about our Constitution when it's been under threat. And it's interesting. And to your point, history is so important. You know what I mean? History is so important. Oh, there you are. History is so important for us to know, because a lot of people say, for example, I know there's a lot of white people out there who, with DEI, and saying, oh, black people have just the same opportunity to do whatever they want in our country as I do. And I think if we look at history and we look at every time the black community had Black Wall Street or the Tulsa race riots, that I didn't even know a lot of this history. Most white people were, we're only taught about Martin Luther King for the most part. And a lot of people don't really understand now. Martin Luther King is, I had a dream, and everybody's like, why can't they be more like Martin Luther King and this and that and peaceful? But they don't understand. They killed Martin Luther King. He was assassinated. And I think if more of us could understand and really go over real American history, I think we could have more sympathy for each other's struggles. For example, if there's so many shitty parents out there, I realize, parenting is the most important job in the world right now, because, the way I teach my kids to be accepting of others, to, my son will be like, oh, one of my friends says the N word. I was like, well, that's not cool. You need to call them out and let them know that is not okay. And so if somebody had, say, their father beat them, right, and then they grow up and they beat their child, well, you could say, well, this guy's a piece of shit, which, But if we go back and look at their history of why, I just think history, I realize, is so important. And then so many people are so, the critical race theory, like, oh, they're trying to teach us history. And, Trump is made the Smithsonian take anything that was negative or racist out of our history books. In Pennsylvania, they removed that, how George Washington had slaves, where, and I see a lot of people like, white people don't have to feel guilt. Like people say, I didn't have anything to do with that. But it's the education of saying, yes, I didn't have slaves, but I recognize white people did. And so I can understand why Black America, it feels the way, it's almost like if we could step into each other's shoes and feel a little empathy, we would just all get along much better. Because when I say white privilege, a lot of people, oh, that's Sam, there's no white privilege. And it's like, but there is. I recognize the way that I look in a suit. I can walk in anywhere and I get everybody's like, who are you? And my Black counterpart dressed up in the same suit and everything like that just doesn't get that same privilege. And it doesn't take away white privilege to admit it, but by understanding it, you're giving empathy and sympathy to people who don't have it. And it just makes you more well-rounded, I believe.
Yeah, they with this idea of white privilege, people are associating it with, and I don't want to label people, but I would argue
Sure.
a bit more on the right are labeling the sort of white privilege as thinking, oh, the left is saying white people need to feel bad, they need to be feel ashamed, and that there's some sort of financial advantage, which is something we could talk about a little further. But to a certain extent, at the base level, what white privilege suggests is what you said, where you dress up in a suit and people take note. People go, oh, they open doors for you. They're like, who's this guy? He must be important. He must be a business guy. A Black guy dresses up in a suit and people are like, where'd you steal that from? Where'd you, what you're trying to pretend to be something that you're not. And it's like that's what the white privilege is. You are given the benefit of the doubt. And other people in the country who are not white are not given that same benefit of doubt.
Sure. Yeah. If it's a Latino, if it's an Asian person, like it's just, and that's how our forefathers, they wrote it. Like, even if we go back into all of entertainment, look at every Disney film, the hero is this white, it's crazy. I even look at a lot of, like, I don't know if you ever seen, like, my kids will watch Despicable Me and some of those, and there's not anybody Black cartoon wise. Or there's not really any minorities. If they are, they're in the back. Or I remember the movie The Lorax, the cartoon. And I'm funny. I see this stuff. And then I imagine, well, what does that feel like to a Latino boy or girl, or a young Black boy or girl, not seeing themselves represented? And I think white people, the reason we don't see it is because all entertainment has represented us in a very positive way, where white is innocence, dark is evil. And and I'm not one of those, I know people are like, oh, we gotta, I don't like the cartoons to just be doing it for the sake of
exactly. That's not what we're asking.
Like Coco was a perfect example. That I love that movie, and it's obviously celebrates the Latino culture. So it doesn't mean you have to, it doesn't mean there can't be all white casts. I mean, it's all over television, but I think it's the idea of letting minorities tell their own story.
Exactly. Letting them tell their own story. And that I was going to say something about the movies. I should have wrote that one down. I'm just going to say I agree. That was a great point. I agree 100%. Yeah.
Now,
Superstore. You should watch Superstore. You said you noticed.
Yeah. One of my friends, Colton Dunn, is he's the Black guy on there, is kind of bald.
Oh, get out of town. You know him? That's so you mentioned you would do comedy. That's so cool. Yeah, that show was great. It was super diverse. They had people in handicapped individuals. It was so they talked about it in the show. They hit that fourth wall and they were like, let's address it. Let's talk about these sorts of things. It's so cool that you know him. That's really awesome.
Yeah. I mean, that's that's a cool thing about being out in Los Angeles in the comedy community. It's just, you kind of, I know Dave Chappelle. I've, during the pandemic, I got to go to Yellow Springs, Ohio, where Dave Chappelle just hosted everybody in comedy shows, and he was COVID testing everybody every day. So we were in this bubble, and I was like, got to get really close with him and his family, and just an amazing
That's really cool.
experience.
It sounds like it.
Oh, it was
Awesome.
insane. It was like it was like Field of Dreams for comedians. Like Jon Stewart is there. We'd go down the Miami River in Ohio, and I'm just talking to Jon Stewart about the Daily Shows. He's just in a canoe next to me in his bathing suit, and it was so just relaxed and everything. But what do you think about everything that's going on? I mean, these Epstein files, everybody, I mean, people are like, all right, can we talk about something different? And, people are like, it's so polarizing. How could we talk about anything else at this moment? It's like they're all on it and they're all part of it, Democrat or Republican or Hollywood or, and it's so sick what we're seeing in these files.
I feel like some of what we're seeing is intentions to attempt to polarize individuals. Moot, the creator of 4chan, was in the Epstein files, and there's information to suggest that Moot and Epstein were hanging out and talking to each other about how Moot on 4chan noticed human behavior and was suggesting about ways to manipulate and inform that sort of situation where you find people who are already kind of leaning in a certain way, or you want that polarization. You get people at each other's throats. So even if they're not leaning the way you want, at the very least, what's going to happen is these people are going to talk with each other and they're going to push each other further against away from each other, deeper into an echo chamber. And so it's very, and I think we should be only talking about this. Here we are. Here, QAnon. I haven't heard QAnon say shit. QAnon was talking about Democrats running a pedophile cabal, running the world. Here we are. They have proof. They have evidence of it. Democrats were in there too. Let's take them both down, Democrats and Republicans. Sorry,
all the Pizzagate stuff. I mean, you're seeing like, pizza. These are literally code words.
And that's what was part of the plan. I'm so sorry. That's what was part of this plan of Darvo: deny, attack, reverse victim, and defender. This was part of the plan. I don't want to get too conspiracy theory here, but the way that I see things having played out is that with this Pizzagate stuff, that was an intentional thing that somebody up at the top was doing, so that when these Epstein files came out, it didn't look as suspicious when they're using this word pizza, or individuals can just say, "Oh, you're just a conspiracy theorist. Did you see how the other Pizzagate turned out?" Clearly these files don't mean anything in definitive proof, and it's just like,
and I keep hearing everybody loves to say, well, why didn't anybody else do anything before this? And it's always answered because everybody is part of it. It's I don't know why,
exactly.
Of course we hear Trump, and the thing is, what I know about Trump is he sues anybody. I mean, he's already sued news organizations for edits. He's suing our own government $10 billion, which Scott Bessent admitted that comes out of taxpayers' dollars. So don't you think if Trump was clear of the Epstein files, he would give up maybe he wouldn't give up some of his cabinet. I see him protecting his own loyalists, but don't you think he would be suing for defamation of character? Because there's not a worse thing you can call somebody on our planet than a pedophile. And it's such a damaging thing. I remember back in middle school, there was this kid who accused our middle school principal of touching him on a camping trip. And it came out that did not happen, but it was too late. It didn't matter. The guy, his career was ruined anyway. So, my argument for people, and I think I know it comes back to Trump, but I think it's because he's been so deflective. He's like, can we just talk about something else? It's to me, it's so obvious that they're lying. When Kash Patel is sitting there like saying under oath that Jeffrey Epstein didn't traffic anybody. I mean, they just saw, was it I'm messing up his name, but he was the one that found out who had this email about, I love that torture video. I mean, the torturing of these children is just disgusting. And like Megyn Kelly, she was like, come on, they're like 17. They're barely legal. It's like, no.
Yeah, that's
like, it's just,
they want to get into semantics of like what the difference is between a pedophile and whatever those other fucking words are. And you're like, look, I'm fine to play the semantics game, but it gets a little weird. You're like, okay, well, why do you care so much about you? If it was the rule of law, if it's in the court system, yeah, that's when you need to know semantics to be like, okay, we're
Mhm.
specifically accusing him of this in the court of law. But we were just sitting around talking about it. It's like, well, why are you so quick to defend him for not being a pedophile? That's what we're all calling him, because
Right.
we don't care enough again, this isn't the court of law. We don't need to get into the semantics game. When we're in the court of law, yes, we can play the semantics game and say, let's make sure that we're defining these as necessary.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Yeah, and it's like I almost think, and I really appreciate you coming on. I think we
Thank you.
need more town halls. You know
Yeah,
what I mean? Where because
that's
I
how I
think the
see your
problem is,
show. I
yeah.
said this last time. I was like,
Mhm.
yeah, this is you. Sorry to interrupt you there, but
No,
I
you're fine.
appreciate you having a space like this where I could come on and take notes about what some people had said a couple days ago and come back
Right.
on and talk about it again moving forward, and hope
Yeah.
that those individuals come back on and we can have a conversation about it in the future.
Yeah.
You
And
are the town hall, Sam. You're
oh,
changing
thank
the world.
you. Thank you. Well, and even the guy I had on yesterday, there was this little glimmer where he's like, "Hey man, can you maybe help me with my YouTube channel?" He's like, they're kind of like, "Man, you're saying the N-word, you're doing all this." He's like, "Get all the goddamn illegals out." And then I was like, "Do you think Jesus would be so harsh?" And yeah, I think, and we found a tiny bit of common ground. Now he did say, look, if Trump is if he's really accused of this, then he says get him out. And I think the problem is like our the extreme left or right of our society, it's easy to throw those people away.
Mhm.
But I'm fascinated with the human psyche of why people think the way they do. Or a lot of people, they'll say, well, I had a bad experience when I was young, and that's why I hate all these kind of people. And I had an experience when I was young where this group of black kids, I'm in the mall in St. Louis going down the escalator, and I just say, "Hey, what's up?" to this guy. As soon as I turn my head, this guy clocked me in the face.
Damn.
And I was like, whoa, what the hell? Why'd that guy hit me? My friends jump over the escalator, go after him. Security catches them. We're in the security office. I said, why did you hit me? And the guy just like, looked at me. And I found out from the security guard that this was like a gang initiation called knockout, where if you can knock somebody out, you get into the gang. Now,
Wow.
I could have taken that experience and said, oh,
Yeah.
I can't trust anybody black anymore. I'm going to be scared if I see a group of black kids. But it was interesting because I remember, and I was in 8th grade, having this kind of epiphany that no, I have to treat everybody like an individual. And I
Wow.
realize a lot of people, when they claim racism, they'll say, well, my dad had this and that. And I realize it's so important that when we have these experiences, if a white guy did, if a white guy God forbid, rape somebody I love or whatever, I can't hate all white people. And I can't think all white people are going to do that. But I think a lot of humans don't possess that ability of forgiveness or to understand that I can only judge that individual for their actions. And like the guy yesterday was like, all these illegals and da. And I was like, if Latino people, and that's the thing, they're only predominantly, it seems, going after Latinos,
Mhm.
Somalians, black and brown people. And it just, I think if you had more relationships in these communities, you would have more empathy. And I think there's a real lack of empathy. And I think the reason is because you could be living in a rural area. Like I grew up in St. Louis. It was white and black, but it's segregated. Chicago, white and black. Detroit, white and black. So the whites live on one side, blacks live on one. Now, of course, there's black people who are racist towards white people, and there's white people, there's racism everywhere. But I think, I'm lucky to be in Los Angeles where I think I've said you can't help but be friends with all different kinds of people. And that allows you to say, oh, well, maybe I had this stereotype, but guess what? My friend Hector, he's Mexican, he's a Marine, one of the best friends I have, one of the greatest guys. Like he'll help you move, whatever you need, he is there. And it just, it teaches you that there's good people in every race, but you can't just get rid of everyone just because we have these now. And it's very hard, I understand, for people to do because they might have had racist parents who they, again, it goes back to the parenting
It's
and
taught.
what you're
Yeah.
saying to your kids. And
It's not something
it's
we're
hard
born
to
with.
undo racism, but I feel
Mm.
like more now than ever is when we need town halls. And, because I don't want to just sit there and talk to people who agree with me. That's easy. That's done.
Yeah.
They say preaching to the choir. I want to try to talk to somebody who we seem to have nothing in common, but then after speaking and the anger calms down, we can find out what we really have in common. And I think that's when you could start to heal people. I remember like John McCain, when that woman took the microphone when he was up against Obama, she's like, he's a foreigner. He wasn't born here. And it's like, no, ma'am, no. He's a good family man. We just happen to disagree on some fundamental issues, and I think that's where politics has to get back to is this diplomacy and a politeness.
Yes, definitely.
But yeah, it's interesting. I'm actually fascinated with all this Epstein file stuff because, at least,
oh yeah,
hey man, I'm like, good, expose them all. I mean, remember that guy? I forget, Larry Krausner or what? No, what was his name? The gymnastics gyno who like molested all those. I mean, it's like usually we have no problem with getting rid of these kind of people, but because it's so ingrained right now into our system, I think for years they've been like, well, those Epstein files, it's just too much for everybody to handle. And I think we're at a point where there's kind of no going back,
Yeah, you said earlier, who was it? That actor Johnny Depp was he was canceled. He was removed from all his movies, and like the litigation had not even happened. He was just being accused of something, and so people are so quick to cancel these individuals. But here we are for some reason, and I heard this very early on in the election when Kamala was when they were doing their debates, Trump and Kamala. Trump gets to be perfect. Everybody else around him has to be perfect. And it's just, it doesn't make sense. Why do people look at that's the white privilege to a certain extent? Trump is given the benefit of the doubt at every turn of the corner.
Yeah, he's white privilege like personified. Yeah. You know what I mean? Because it goes to show, like, his famous thing, I could sit in, the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and get away with it. But the fact is, it was way worse than that. He could be allegedly maybe a pedophile, and people still do not want to believe it, and I think, if we could get people to start to drop this, the whole left and right thing has just been so toxic to our society.
And that's what I was finding interesting about the Epstein files too, with this connection to Moot and 4chan, because a lot of what is accredited to some of the, the deep internet conspiracy theorists and whatnot look at 4chan and talk about how a lot of these right-wing groups kind of like were personified versions of what a lot of this hatred that was being talked about on 4chan. It was a place for not just degenerates, not just people who are for straight racists, just absolute hateful people calling for the death of others. And when you see what's happened now with how divisive things have got, it's hard to not look at that and be like, this has to be somebody had to have been influencing this. Why and how have we gotten this far? We have all these technology, we have all these phones and screens and information, and yet we're in the age of information. There's no excuse to be ignorant at this point, yet so many people still are.
Oh, how is that possible? You saw Jelly Roll say, oh man, I'm just dumb redneck. Don't listen to me. I don't ridiculous. And then you see pictures of him at UFC, which it's like Jelly Roll. And then he gets up there, thank the Lord, thank you, like they call it performative Christianity. I'm learning. And I'm Jewish, and I've learned, I know people, family, friends who claim to go to church. The guy I had on yesterday said, I go to church every Sunday. I was like, but you say the N word and you're saying fuck all illegals, and you have so much anger. And he's just sitting there in the middle of nowhere in Texas, like, how are these immigrants? Are they coming onto your land? Are they taking your, this whole idea of just this anger? And, I look back at some of the old civil rights videos of white people just saying, yeah, they just want to come into our schools. And it's almost, we've replaced Black Americans with illegals. And if you look, the conversations are still the same. It's just a new fear. And then you think of, a lot of people, these grandkids of these racist people who are pouring sugar on people who were doing a sit-in, just trying to sit at the same diner, a white, they had, I know like my mother-in-law lived in Mobile, Alabama, and they had black and white drinking fountains growing up. I remember I was like, but didn't you think that was crazy? And she said, we just didn't think anything of it, and it's crazy because if your parents aren't saying they're like, yo, that's fucked up, there's no reason for a child to think there's anything wrong with it, and again, it goes back to our history, and getting over. Everybody keeps saying in the comments, liberals were racist, they started the KKK. Like, yeah, of course, the Democratic Party and I know a lot of white liberal people who are like, I'm not like, I had a friend, I won't name his name. We were in St. Louis and we were talking to this black female, and he goes, can I touch your hair? And I was like, oh my God. I was like, the rule number one with black women, you do not touch a black woman's hair, and he asked her, he's like, are your lips real or those? And I'm like, oh my God, and she goes, do you have any black friends at all? And he's like, yeah, I'm not, so most people aren't even aware of their ignorance because they don't hang out with enough people to say, yeah, you just don't touch a black woman's hair. You know what I mean? That's just something, there's just little rules, unwritten rules. But I think if you're not around people, you don't learn those things from each other.
Well, it's funny to think though too, because it's like, well, how often are you touching your white friend's hair, right? It's like, it's not something you would ever really do to another person you do regardless. And so it does, when you talk about these small towns, these individuals, like they actually probably don't know black people or gay people or trans people, and they're completely confined to this sort of white Christian American nationalist view, and so were their parents, and so were their grandparents, and so were their grandparents before them. And so it's generations of individuals of projecting this sort of like aggression and hatred and anger. So I saw some of those comments you were pinning, and I wanted to address that too. So the parties flipped, my understanding, around the 60s. So what are modern day Republicans? So when they're saying that Republicans freed the slaves, the parties flipped. So when the slaves were freed, that the party that was the Republicans that freed them would be the modern day Democrats. And so what they're saying was actually incorrect, because they're talking about how all these things the Republicans did, all these things the Democrats did back in the day prior to the 60s, and the parties switched. So all the things that they're saying is actually the modern day Republicans doing, being racist, being aggressive, as they're accusing Democrats back in the day. The parties switched. So what they're suggesting is not exactly an accurate assessment. As well, it's kind of a silly thing to talk about, because it's like, there's a lot of history you got to go into about the party switching and exactly what happened there and what it is that we're talking about and what defines political beliefs. So it's kind of a moot point in general. It's like, let's talk about history, but why do we have to say, oh, Republicans 100 years ago freed the slaves? It's like, okay, well, we're talking about the Republican Party today. Sure, great, thank you, Republican Party, for there shouldn't have been slavery in the first place, so I'm not going to say thank you for freeing the slaves that you had, but okay, good, we've made a furthering step in history. That's again why I say it's a moot point. It's like, it's not even like
or even like people who couldn't understand why Colin Kaepernick was kneeling to just bring awareness to police brutality. And then people not understand that, the police were formed out of the KKK. They're from the slave catchers into
Texas Rangers.
Police. And I think it's just, if you understand that, the old phrase that say, oh, black people just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Or if they hear somebody black has to try 10 times harder than the white counterpart, again, some white people can't hear that. And they tune right out. And I think it's, again, if we could understand history, you would understand that, it doesn't take anything away from me to understand our history and why we are where we are, and how what's sad is, we think things have changed so much, and God, sometimes I just feel like we're right back where we were. Somebody in the comments says, don't touch a Latina woman's hair either. Facts. I think it's this fascination. I think what it makes people feel like that you're treating them like, oh, let me, oh, can I touch your afro? Can I touch your hair? It's so, oh my God, it's like different. Can I? And it's like, kind of to your point, like, you don't see, black women are, I let them touch my hair all the time. I'm like, hey, reparations. If you want to if you want to roll your hand through this shit, go ahead. I owe you.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah. So, I got a break for today, but I really appreciate you coming on. You're
Yeah,
always
yeah.
welcome to come on. I really appreciate your intelligence and your
Thank you.
conversation and openness. And yeah, that's my goal is to actually have, I've been doing some work with the Midas Touch folks, and I'd almost like to do that, like in a town hall with people in the audience where anybody can grab the microphone and express their grievances and say how they feel. And I think, if I don't know if you ever seen the movie American History X. My good friend Guy Torrey was in that. It's Edward Norton, but anybody
I'll take a look. Thank you.
yeah, American History X. It's a great
Cool.
movie because it's about these skinheads, and Edward Norton's a skinhead who goes to prison for killing a black guy, and in prison he meets Guy Torrey, who's in prison, who ends up saving him from being killed by other prisoners, and they're working together in the laundry room, and through their conversations, the white supremacist guy realized, like, oh my God, I've just been fed all these lies, and this guy is my brother. He saved my life. And I think if more people were like stuck in an elevator, so to speak, with each other, they'd have to find common ground eventually and realize, like, hey man, this person's just like me. They're trying to feed their family, they're trying to get a job. And I think that day is coming. I believe we can still get there. I don't believe in throwing anybody away. But
That's why I think a space like yours where you create that environment. It's hard to
Mhm.
suggest to people too to be like, "Oh, well, let's go. You need to go talk to the racists so they
Yeah,
stop being a racist." It's
yeah,
kind of scary to suggest that, but when you can have this online space with a mediator such as
yeah,
yourself to
yeah.
keep things cool, keep things calm and collected, and
Right.
allow for people to feel safe to come try to talk to these people, and then to the racists as well, to a certain extent, as much as it's silly to say, but they need a safe space too to feel
Yeah,
safe and comfortable, like they're
yeah.
not getting attacked and
So
whatnot.
they can talk and say,
Hmm.
why do you feel this way? Is somebody really wronged you like that? And I think that's what has to happen at this point, because all I see is pundits. If you watch like Pierce Morgan, I see that
Yeah.
Tim Miller from the Bull. Like, you shut the fuck. No, shut
Hmm.
up. No, you shut the fuck. No, listen to me. You shut. No, you're a fucking. And it's like, guys. Okay, get the anger out. Let's bring the tone down and listen. That's why I just try to let yesterday I was just letting this guy talk. I don't need to be necessarily debating. I'm not like the greatest. I'm not a great debater. I'm not trying to say, oh well, in 1946,
Yeah.
proving you wrong. It's like, let's express ourselves. Let's calm down, and then realize that it's really these billionaires who are keeping us all fighting and making money off of our backs and promoting all of these ideologies of fear, because they know if they can keep these guys, their base, scared, if the base isn't scared, then they're not going to agree with a lot of the shit they're getting away with. But yeah, thank you again for coming on the show. And like I said, it's always open to anybody who wants to come on and just lay your opinion out here. And it's like a therapy session for the country, you know what I mean, which we all really need. And my goal is eventually, when we can get over this right and left and blaming, I hate how politicians just, they're like, oh, it's the Democrats, oh, it's the Republicans, and like, just, it's like children, and we all need to start acting like adults. So
Yeah,
thank you again.
I'll hop off here. Yeah, can
Yeah,
I get a final statement in, if you
please.
don't mind?
Yeah,
Thank you. So, yeah, I'd like to address the chat a little bit. Like Sam's space is amazing. He has if you've disagreed with anything he said or anything that I've said, he's offering for you all to call in and come talk about these sorts of
yeah,
things. And so, I would just like to say, I would really hope to hear and listen to some of the individuals in chat that were disagreeing in the future. Let's have a conversation about these sorts of things. This is the town hall space that Sam keeps talking about, and we need that,
yeah.
and we need that sort of thing. And so I'll leave it at that. Thank you for having me on. I really
Thank
appreciate it. I
you.
will be back. I will be back.
Okay, thank you. Anytime. Have a great day. Appreciate you. All right, guys, this has been a beautiful day. I appreciate it. We got to get off. I got to go handle the kids again. But again, any view you have, you're always safe to come in here, share your opinions, whether it sounds good or bad. We got to hear it so we can learn from each other and improve and be better. That is, I'm Jewish. I'm a Jew for Jesus. And that's what Jesus would want us to all do, is to find a way of common ground to get along. Love you guys. Secret Service Sam out. Samson for president of the world.
Can you freestyle rap at all?
Not yet.
Doesn't it appear to be extremely coincidental that you guys arrest people right outside of Governor Newsom's press conference? Is this really just a show of power?